I guess I was fairly apprehensive the whole time that I was flying in combat. And I guess there's good reason to feel that way. I'm there to cause a lot of damage and a lot of harm, and therefore they would like to damage me. And I was 25 years old at that time.
I am Lieutenant Colonel Schmidt from the Bomber Section of the Directorate of Aerospace Safety at Norton Air Force Base, California. You are about to see and hear a most unusual story about the aircraft you fly, a story that has made aviation history. We at the Directorate of Aerospace Safety believe the factors of this incident will increase your understanding of B-52 flight characteristics and heighten your appreciation of its capabilities. The aircraft involved was a B-52H on loan to the Boeing Company. Its flight crew members were Mr. Charles Fisher, instructor pilot, Mr. Richard Curry, pilot, Mr. Leo Kors, co-pilot, and Mr. James Pittman, navigator. Here to tell you this remarkable story firsthand is one of the Boeing pilots who was at the controls, Mr. Richard Curry. Dick?
Thank you, Colonel Smith. Our mission was to conduct a flight load survey to obtain and record the structural loads encountered on a routine low-level sortie. Special instruments were installed in the cockpit to record the stresses exerted on various parts of the aircraft. An 8-hour flight was scheduled along a route running from Wichita, Kansas, southwest to the Rocky Mountains. The mission called for 10-minute runs at 280, 350, and 400 knots calibrated airspeed at 500 feet above the ground, utilizing the low-level mode of the autopilot. The initial portion of the flight progressed as planned with only light turbulence encountered at the end of the 6th leg. However, as the aircraft turned north in the vicinity of Wagon Mound, New Mexico, and began a course parallel to the mountains, the instruments, identified here in orange, began indicating increasing turbulence and heavy gust loads on the tail section. We elected to discontinue the low-level portion of the flight, and the aircraft was climbed to 14,300 feet mean sea level, where the air was relatively smooth. We then decided to continue the mission using the next speed schedule of 350 knots. Since the terrain elevation was steadily increasing, the aircraft flight path was approximately 1,000 feet above and slightly to the right of East Spanish Peak near Aguilar, Colorado. Wind at this time indicated 62 knots west component, but no turbulence was noted. Then at 345 knots, while accelerating to 350 knots, an area of extreme turbulence was encountered. It lasted approximately 9 seconds. With this model, I will attempt to show you approximately what happened to the aircraft when it was struck by this turbulence. The turbulence came in rapid, explosive-like gusts. The airplane was pitched up and yawed to the left, followed immediately by a very rapid yaw to the right and a resultant right rolling moment. This motion was opposed with approximately 80% left wheel authority. A high-frequency vibration was felt in the rudder pedals, and rudder pedal displacement gave no response. The elevator response was also very poor. The crew was alerted to prepare to abandon the aircraft. However, we soon realized that the aircraft still had marginal control. At this time, the air brakes were raised to position 1 to improve longitudinal stability, and a fuel transfer was started to maintain a forward center of gravity. Lateral control was aided by very small asymmetric power settings, which helped maintain the aircraft in a side-slipping flight attitude. After the aircraft was brought under marginal control, we called for assistance. The first to arrive was a Boeing Bayol F-100. This is what the pilots saw. Approximately 83% of the vertical fin had been ripped away. We immediately set a course for Wichita, Kansas, and developed our flight strategy. Boeing Flight Test had already recommended that the aft main gear be lowered, as this would be a stabilizing factor in the absence of the vertical fin. Any drag after the center of gravity would tend to stabilize the aircraft. Here, the outboard air brakes are at position 4, which is also an area after the center of gravity. Here, our airspeed is about 210 knots indicated, which is about 30 knots above the minimum recommended for this weight with flaps up. Small excursions up to 220 and down to 200 knots were made. However, 210 knots was found to be most satisfactory. At this time, the altitude was approximately 12,000 feet mean sea level. The center of gravity was calculated to be about 19%, with the vertical fin missing. The weight of the vertical fin is estimated to be about 2,000 pounds. Due to the reports of unfavorable weather at Wichita, it was finally decided to divert us to Blytheville Air Force Base, Arkansas, where surface winds were more favorable. While in the Blytheville area, making preparations for landing, we were advised to extend the tip protection gears first. Then the forward trucks were lowered. A yawing oscillation occurred during forward gear extension. However, this ceased when the gear reached a down and lock indication. We reduced airspeed to 160 knots at 10,000 feet and prepared for a long, flat final approach, hoping to be able to flare and touch down at the same speed. 160 knots flaps up approach speed was selected in order to obtain optimum body angle. We had computed a no drag chute stopping distance of 5,000 feet. Here is the aircraft on final approach. 160 knots, outboard air brakes at position 4. All engines are near idle. Crossing the threshold, still at 160 knots, the aircraft started a slight left drift, and we decided not to hold off any longer, but put it on the runway. At touchdown, all air brakes were raised to position 6. We elected to use the drag chute, but decelerated to 130 knots before deploying it. We considered the possibility of a go-around, and had it been necessary, we would have used outboard air brakes at number 6 position. This is the B-52 at Blytheville Air Force Base shortly after landing. This aircraft was flown 5 hours in this configuration from the scene of the incident over Colorado to Wichita and then to Blytheville Air Force Base, Arkansas. A portion of the aircraft's original mission was to record the gust loads found in moderate turbulence. However, the loads we encountered were much greater than had been anticipated. An analysis of the recorded information revealed gust loads of a greater magnitude than had ever previously been recorded on any large aircraft. Well, Colonel, I guess that about sums it up.
Thank you, Dick. We at the Directorate of Aerospace Safety are indeed grateful to you for bringing us this first-hand report. A review of the data collected on this flight indicates that the airframe design criteria for future heavy aircraft should be reevaluated and possibly revised for future aircraft design. An engineering change to incorporate additional strength in the B-52 empennage is well underway at Wichita. In conclusion, let us review the things which enabled this aircrew to return this aircraft to a safe landing. Excellent crew coordination to regain positive control of the aircraft. A call for chase aircraft. A call for expert technical assistance. Reduction of airspeed to 30 knots above minimum recommended, flaps up. Proper use of air brake settings with inboard air brake circuit breakers pulled. Transfer of fuel for better aircraft stability. Extension of the aft main gear only for directional stability, and judicious use of throttles for desired power settings for optimum controllability. We salute this Boeing flight test crew for a fine job of airmanship. By bringing this aircraft back, they have supplied the Air Force with invaluable data on the gust load velocities that are often imposed on large aircraft flying low-level missions. Salutes also to the other agencies and the Boeing Company for their excellent cooperation.
Flying a 105 was the greatest experience a person can ever have. It was an airplane originally designed as a nuclear strike aircraft to be flown low level. It was extremely fast. In fact, it was the fastest airplane in the world till the F-111 came along below 10,000 feet.
And it was a carrier-based ground attack airplane in Vietnam. And this airplane actually dropped more bombs in North Vietnam than any Navy carrier-based airplane.
You cannot place statues or build memorials in thin air. These airplanes, rescued, restored, returned to the sky, are the memorials. Through them, we give enduring thanks to those who gave everything they had to defend everything that we hold dear. By sharing them, we remind each other of the sacrifice. By sharing them, we introduce our heirs to their heritage. One week each summer, these national treasures are flown here. Twice each day, those who restored them present them to those who risked their lives to fight in them. And those who really did it tell the rest of us how it really was. It is a singular series of history lessons that anyone who cherishes liberty ought to see. As the Vietnam War escalated, Air Force and Navy pilots started flying more and more missions over Laos and North Vietnam. This was very high-risk duty. The North Vietnamese, thanks to Soviet support, had built one of the best air defense systems in the history of strategic aerial warfare. At this Warbirds in Review forum, two iconic aircraft of the Vietnam era, the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk and the A-1 Skyraider, and the pilots who flew them into those treacherous skies, were featured. Paul Wood, the founder and president of the Warbird Heritage Foundation, introduced the two aircraft. They are part of the Foundation's flying collection.
And our mission is to acquire, restore, and operate historic military aircraft. Two of our collection, we have about 12 in the collection right now, and two of them are here with us today. This represents our Vietnam segment of our museum. So we do have a website if you're interested in more information on either of these airplanes or any other airplanes in our collection. It's www.warbird.heritagefoundation.org. And we have lots of pictures and videos on each of the airplanes. We have cockpit pictures, we have maintenance pictures, so we have the airplanes taken apart. You can see inside, see what makes these things run. So you're welcome to get on the website, sign the guest book, and we send out periodic newsletters and things like that. So that's the pitch. So we have with us two phenomenal Vietnam era airplanes here. One is the AD Skyraider and the A-4 Skyhawk. Both played very, very significant roles in Vietnam. And the one to my right here is an A-1 Skyraider. And it was designed by a guy by the name of Ed Heinemann from the Douglas Aircraft Company, who was a very famous designer. And coincidentally, he also was the lead designer on the A-4 Skyhawk as well. Now, the next one over here real quickly is our A-4 Skyhawk. And it was a carrier-based ground attack airplane in Vietnam. And this airplane actually dropped more bombs in North Vietnam than any Navy carrier-based airplane. It was again designed by Ed Heinemann, the Douglas Aircraft Company, and it had nicknames of the Scooter, Heinemann's Hot Rod, the Bantam Bomber, and there's a great loyal fan base of the pilots who flew this airplane. Every time we have someone come up to us and say, I used to fly the Scooter, that's the best airplane I ever flew. And I tend to agree with them because I fly these things as well. So the Skyhawk was first produced in 1956. There were multiple models of the airplane. This is the same airplane, by the way, for those of you who don't know, that Jester and Viper flew in Top Gun as the aggressor pilots, so got a little notoriety there. They flew them they produced them until 1979. And the Blue Angels flew the F version of this from 73 to 86. About 3,000 of them were built. So a couple of significant points about this. When Ed Heinemann designed this airplane, the concept of it was to make it as light as possible so it could carry bombs, rockets, and fuel. So they left a lot of things out. For instance, this airplane doesn't have a battery. Most airplanes will have batteries or you can start them. But in order to save weight, they took the battery out. They took a lot of the oil scavenge and recovery systems out. So when they would ferry these airplanes from the West Coast to the Philippines, they'd do about 5 in-flight refuelings to get them over there. And the biggest problem was running out of oil, not running out of gas, because the oil system here doesn't recover itself. It just there's vents in the back, and so the oil kind of gradually leaks out over time. So the biggest issue was running out of oil instead of running out of gas. This airplane is painted up as an A-4 Charlie model that was flown by a guy by the name of Lieutenant Commander T.R. Schwartz aboard the Bonhomme Richard in the Yankee Station. And Schwartz is credited actually with the only air-to-air kill by an A-4 Skyhawk in Vietnam. He was on a ground attack mission and rolled off his target and found a MiG and shot it with some unguided air-to-ground missiles, and actually was lucky enough to hit the target. So
The second airplane featured, the A-1 Skyraider, was designed near the end of World War II. It became one of the Navy's workhorses during the Korean War.
The Skyraider was first produced in 1946, and it was used in the Korean War initially by the Navy and the Marine Corps as a ground attack, carrier-based ground attack airplane. And it was quite effective, sort of taking the role of what a typical new A-10 would do at the time. The production run ran until about 1957, and over 3,200 of them were built. The engine is a Wright 3350. It's got 18 cylinders, 2 rows of 9, so there's 36 spark plugs in this thing when you have to change the spark plugs, so it's a lot of work. And it generates 2,700 horsepower, so it's one of the largest piston-driven airplanes that the Department of Defense ever had. Actually, I think it's the largest single-engine piston-driven airplane that they had. The airplane is about 11,000 pounds empty weight. But the significant part about this airplane is it can carry its own weight in fuel and armament. So its max takeoff weight is about 22,000 pounds. So when you think about that, 11,000 pounds is what, 5.5 tons? And you can see some of the armament and bombs and fuel and things like that. And so it was really able to put a lot of armaments on target. And with its fuel capacity, it had the ability to loiter for up to 5 or 6 hours at a time. So it had great range, great loiter time, and could put a lot of metal on target. So it's about a 290 knot airplane, give or take. So it's not real fast, but it's built very, very strong and tough, and it could take a big beating. After Korea, the Air Force purchased about 580 of these from the Navy and converted them to A-1Hs and Js. They were used in the Vietnam conflict, primarily for special operations, search and rescue, and light ground attack. And there were several squadrons of these that were helicopter escorts to help provide cover for helicopters coming in and recovering down pilots. And so that's, our airplane here is painted up like an A-1H from the 6th Special Operations Squadron, which was in Pleiku, Vietnam.
Dick Diller, an Air Force pilot learning to fly the massive Skyraider, had a huge transition to make. In one way, airplanes fall into one of two design categories, either nose wheel or tail wheel. The Skyraider is a tail wheel aircraft. All of Diller's previous training had been in nose wheel airplanes.
Yeah, that was a real transition. Out of pilot training, I got an F-106 assignment, and I flew F-106s for 19 months in the fighter squadron at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware in the 95th. And then I got assigned to the A-1, and when I got down to Hurlburt, we got, as Sam said, we got a tail wheel, we got a big reciprocating engine with cowl flaps and fuel mixture, and all the other things that are involved in an airplane with reciprocating engine. And so it was a real transition to go to a tail wheel, and the mission was different also. The interceptor was what we did in the F-106, going after incoming invaders, if you will, Soviet bombers. If they were going to come in, that was the defense against those. Whereas this mission was air to ground, and it was a totally different mission.
On December 5th, 1969, Dick Diller took part in what is still considered the largest wartime search and rescue mission ever mounted. Captain Benjamin Danielson and his weapons system officer, First Lieutenant Woody Bergeron, were shot down in their McDonnell Douglas F-4C Phantom, call sign Boxer 22, over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in northeastern Laos. It would be decades before Captain Danielson could be confirmed as having been killed in action. However, Lieutenant Bergeron was rescued after spending 50 hours in enemy territory. Search and rescue Skyraiders were nicknamed Sandys. Dick Diller flew as a Sandy forward air controller for the Boxer 22 mission.
The Sandys went out, the Sandys were on 5-minute alert, just like we did in F-106s. And the alert schedule was the same type thing. So the Sandys rushed out to the airplane and launched and took off and went over about 60 miles east of the base is where the action was. And the first thing you got to do is you got to eliminate the threat of guns, because when you have guns that are firing at you, you can't bring a helicopter in to hover over a survivor and pick him up with guns shooting at him. So you got to get rid of the guns first. And so with the help of the forward air controllers, the Sandys, actually the Sandy low lead is the on-scene commander, and he comes in and he trolls low level trying to get the guns to shoot at him so they can find out where the guns are and try to knock them out. Now the problem with it was they put the guns in the caves and the karsts. The karsts were limestone formations that came straight up out of the ground, and they'd have caves at the base of them, and that's where they put the guns, so you had to hit them pinpoint. And that was, as I understand, I was told that was the very first time that the laser-guided weapons had been used to knock out the opposition. So then you can bring the helicopter up the river. The survivors are on opposite sides of a river, and you bring the helicopter up the river at low altitude and hover above them and pick them up. Well, the problem with it was the tail rotor on the helicopter that was hovering above the survivor got caught in trees. The aircraft commander on the helicopter thought that he was getting ground fire, and because of that he decided that he had to pull out, and as he pulled away, the survivor said, "Why did he leave?" He said, "I was 5 feet from the hoist. Why did he leave? I was 5 feet from him." And it just broke our heart because it was so close to getting the guy out of there. We couldn't get him out. So we had to leave him overnight, and the next day it was more of the same. The problem with it was the first thing we heard in the morning from the survivor was that the front seater had been killed in the night. They didn't take prisoners in Laos at the time that I was flying over there. They just shot whoever they came across. And he said that after he got picked up, he said that what happened was the worst time was just towards dark when everybody had gone home. All the Skyraiders had left and all the attack airplanes had gone. The worst time was just, it wasn't quite dark yet. They didn't have flashlights, but they still had a light illumination in the sky. And they came down to the river and they started looking for him. They found his place where he had been holed up there, and he said that they shot the AK-47 into that area there. He said he had moved up the river about 50 yards, and he said if they turned around, they would have seen me. They left, and he survived the night. It was on the third day we finally got him picked up, and that was a cause for great celebration on the base. There was hundreds and hundreds of missions that had been flown in support of rescuing this one guy, and he's still alive and lives in South Georgia. His name is Woody Bergeron. He was originally from New Orleans. This passage was written in response to the mother of one of the guys that I had just flown with was shot down. And he was, I had just talked to him and became friends with him, and I had flown with him the night before. And the night he was shot down, I was going to go out about 2 hours later. So I was in briefing when the word came into the command post that he had been shot down. By the way, in my squadron, the time we were there, out of 20 pilots in the squadron, we lost 7 of our pilots. So it was not a good situation. But he was shot down, and he was in the same airplane I had been in the night before. Well, his mother didn't want to accept just that he wasn't going to come home, so she wrote a letter to the wing commander asking about information about what happened to her son, and this is why this passage was written in response to that. I was talking about, the letter made me realize why my mother was trying so hard not to cry that morning nearly a year ago at O'Hare International Airport when she and Dad and Emily saw me off. She had said, "Be careful, Dick." "I will, Mom, don't worry." I knew I was well trained, and I could only imagine the hazards that lay ahead. But now I knew about those hazards firsthand. And thanks to Rick's mother's letter, I could see a family side. The ones left at home a little more clearly, and that may have been the more difficult to handle. I have had it said to me, "I don't know if I would have had the courage to do what you did, to face danger without flinching. You're lucky because you know you've got what it takes." Well, I never know how to reply to that because I don't know if I could do it again. All I know is I did it then, and I was one of the lucky ones who survived. That feeling of invincibility is essential to anyone who looks danger in the eye and keeps going. But the tragedies of Rick Chorlins and J.B. East and Clint Ward and Bob Moore and Dick Lytle and Jim Herrick and all my other friends who had been killed and the sadness of their families brought me back to the reality that we were playing for keeps and no one is invincible. What she had said in her letter, she said, I want to have more information about what he was doing, who he was flying with, where he was, and what happened to him. And then she wrapped it up by saying, a piece of paper is not much of an exchange for a son.
The F-105 Thunder Chief, nicknamed Thud, was the largest single-engine fighter ever flown by the Air Force. It was designed in the early 1950s to deliver a nuclear bomb. Well, when that nuke mission seemed off the table, the airplane was reconfigured into a single-engine fighter and conventional weapons bomber. It did a great job in the skies over Southeast Asia. It had a short wingspan, only 35 feet. That's about the same as a Piper Cub, and it was 60 feet long and could reach Mach 2. That was only 10 feet shorter than a B-17. Dave Waldrop flew the Thud over North Vietnam.
Flying a 105 was the greatest experience a person can ever have. It was an airplane originally designed as a nuclear strike aircraft to be flown low level, single pilot, radar terrain avoidance, all weather. The airplane was extremely sophisticated. It was extremely fast. In fact, it was the fastest airplane in the world till the F-111 came along below 10,000 feet. And it was an airplane in spite of its size, and this is what most people just can't comprehend. You probably, especially you that are pilots, you probably heard people talk about you wear the airplane, you become part of it and stuff like that. You generally wouldn't think of a big airplane that's some 60 feet long, 35 feet wide, that grosses about 53,000 pounds on takeoff. You wouldn't think of wearing that airplane. You'd think more of just flying the airplane. But once you got comfortable with the airplane, I did not even have to look inside at the instruments. I knew exactly where I was with that airplane. And it was because the airplane was so well balanced. And it was a terrific airplane in formation. And it would carry a lot of armament, and it would take a lot of abuse. And unfortunately, those poor airplanes, they got some abuse. It was just so solid, and like I said, it would take all this abuse and still get you home. And I've got pictures at home showing holes as big around as I am through the wing. One guy got hit with a ATOL, which is our version, or the North Vietnamese Soviet version of the Sidewinder. The thing actually went off, blew the back end of the engine, the tail feathers, turkey feathers, and for the afterburner and so forth, just blew them off. And the rocket motor actually embedded in the side of the airplane. He flew the thing home.
In the Vietnam era, aerial dogfighting, like in World War II, was largely a thing of the past. However, dogfighting did happen in Southeast Asia. U.S. pilots also had to avoid barrages of supersonic surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, which were deployed all around the Hanoi area. Dave Waldrop was transferred to Korat, Thailand, where he continued flying these high-risk missions over Hanoi. He explained why August 23, 1967 is a day he will never forget.
I got there, since I was already had more missions than anybody at Korat over Hanoi. They made me an immediate flight lead, so I was flying number 3 in crossbow flight. And we were going up on a big railroad yard, Yen Vinh Railroad Yard, which is just across the, not the Mekong, but the Red River from Hanoi. And it was such a big target that they actually were attaching 2 F-4 Phantom strike flights along with our 4 F-105 strike flights.
As Waldrop and his flight headed toward Hanoi, they were joined by Colonel Robin Olds and his flight of F-4 Phantoms. The Phantoms were there to deter MiG fighters who came up to attack the F-105s. Well, because the Thud was faster than the Phantom, the operations had to be very carefully timed to prevent the Thuds from outrunning their escorts. As the F-105s started their runs from northwest of Hanoi, the Air Force's radar surveillance aircraft, nicknamed Big Eye, was orbiting off the coast of North Vietnam.
And sure enough, Big Eye, and we hadn't seen very few MiGs during my tour. I started in May all the way through. I had probably, at this point, right at close to 55, 60 missions. Very few MiGs. And so they started calling Bandits, Bullseye. Bandits are what they referred to as the MiG. That meant that they're taking off out of the Hanoi area. Then they started calling out Vectoring West. And well, this was an afternoon sortie. Where's the sun in the afternoon? Yeah, about 3 o'clock position, or I mean about 9 o'clock if you're looking at 12 o'clock, using that as a reference. So they was in the west. And these MiGs were taking off out of Hanoi, heading west, and we were coming in. Remember I mentioned the 2 refueling routes, depending on which way you were coming in. We were coming in from the west, overland, where we did our refueling. And so we're coming in, the MiGs are obviously up, they're headed out our direction, somewhere. So Robin says, okay, we're searching, we're looking for them. And we now have turned the corner and are heading toward Hanoi. We've gone around the backside of Thud Ridge, we're now pointed toward Hanoi, and we're just about to reach the push-up point, and the Big Eye starts calling bandits at your 6. And so everybody's looking. Force commander calls Robin and says, Robin, find these guys, get them off our ass. And so Robin said, I'm doing everything I can, guys, we're looking for them. And Robin Olds, and when he said he was doing everything he can, I promise you, he was doing everything he could. Well, Robin's doing everything he could, but he was trying to stay near us as well, so he couldn't go 40 miles behind us so he can throw his search radars toward us. That just doesn't work like that. And so anyway, 2 MiG-21s come through. They launch out 2 of their ATOL missiles, which I remember I said earlier is a heat seeker, and knock down 2 F-4s right behind my flight. So we hadn't even hit the push-up point. Now we got guys hollering, Mayday, Mayday, bail out, bail out. Beepers going off, and when you eject from one of these fighters, you got a beeper that goes off, and it sounds like, ew, 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 ew. We got 3 of those things going off because one of the guys did not get out of the airplane. We got 3 of those beepers going off. We're trying to concentrate on going inbound on the target. And guys, that was a lot of stuff taking place, and like I said, we hadn't even hit the push-up point. Well, but what you do, as I mentioned earlier, there's nothing you can do about those guys. There is no rest gap where they were. We kept driving. We kept driving right on in toward the target. And we did, and when we got to the target, I started seeing all these MiG-17s. Well, our job was to bomb a railroad yard, not to chase MiGs. So we're doing our thing now, and as a flight, we're all oriented in our positions for rolling in on the target. We're about 15,000 feet and would roll in on the target, usually make about a 45, 90-degree turn rolling in as you approach the target. Right before I reached the roll-in point, the F-105 had probably the most sophisticated advanced fire control system of any fighter in the world at that point in time and space. It was deadly accurate. I've shot many air-to-air targets with that airplane. If you're smooth at all and you put the pipper on some part of an airplane, that's what you're going to hit. Well, the only thing you got to have the pipper. The pipper is a little dot. And then outside from the dot, you got these rings. There's 2 concentric rings, and it gives you a reference of how big that airplane is, because you can see as you're getting closer, obviously his wings are going to fill up more of that area. So you had an idea of your range, how far out you are. Plus, when you had your radar working and locked on, it's telling you exactly how far out it is. It's beautiful. Well, the only problem is you got to have those rings and a pipper up there to use them. And my bulb burned out as I was approaching the target. That means I'm looking at just a clean windscreen, and it's just like there's just glass up there. And so I had no sight, but I said, well, I've been here, done this many times, so I just rolled in. I looked about right, and at 7,000 feet, I pickled off. I pulled hard to the right like our flight leader had briefed, and I started looking for him, and as I'm looking for him, I look up, and heading west away from the target area was a F-105 Thunder Chief. He was going straight and level, which is absolutely, like I mentioned earlier, an absolute no-no. And there were two MiG-17s right on his butt. The lead MiG, it's got a 37 millimeter, I think it's 37, 35 millimeter cannon in the nose, and that thing is going poof, 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 just like that. I could still see it like August 23rd, 1967, the picture I was looking at. He's shooting at this 105. He's only about 1,500 feet behind him. The guy's going straight and level, had no clue these MiGs were there. And I holler out over the radio. I said, 105, head west, you got two MiGs on your ass, do something. Of course, there was 20 105s up there. And he just kept driving straight. And in all fairness, what we generally did is switch over to our flight frequency, because there's so much chatter up there, so much conversation, you couldn't communicate as a flight to get rejoined. And so he probably never heard it, but still he was going straight level. So I said, well, here's your shot. And I said, I got to get these guys off of him. I had a Sidewinder. Remember, that's a heater. And it seeks out the temperature. It looks for the heat signature from the jet engine. And that's what it hones in on. And my Sidewinder, and it makes this growling sound in your headset when it's got a heat source. And it was looking at that damn heat source, and it was just screaming its head off. Come on, Dave, let me fly, let me fly. And I look at that 105, I looked at MiG behind him. I couldn't do it. The 105's engine is probably 4, maybe 5 times bigger than a MiG's engine, putting out that much more heat, and I could never have lived with myself if I let that thing fly and have it go to the 105. Remember, I didn't have a sight. That would have been the way to go. So anyway, I just turned the volume off on the Sidewinder, and I punched everything off the airplane. My tanks, my bomb rack. That was back then that was a Cadillac, $6,000 for a bomb rack. I punched it off with a panic button, and I still left my outboard pylons. In other words, I had my Sidewinder still, but I lit the full afterburner. I half-G'd the airplane. Anybody that flies airplanes know that when you unload a wing on an airplane, you remove the induced drag off that wing, and you really can start moving. Well, the 105, it was in its element now, because that's what it did. It went fast. So I lit the torch. I dove down so I could come up underneath these guys. So I'm sitting there trying to figure my game plan. Now you got to remember, I'm just a dumb shit lieutenant. And so I hadn't got as much experience as a lot of these fighter pilots have got. And I really do mean that. I wish I had of, because I could have probably thought through this thing a lot better and been more prepared for it. But I did do the best that I thought I could at the time. So I took it low so they wouldn't see me coming. And I decided, well, I'll roll in on number 2 and try to swing over on number 1. The last thing I saw on my airspeed indicator was 1.3 Mach. For those that don't, Mach 1 is supersonic. That means I'm doing right at about 900 miles an hour. Something like that, right? And I didn't realize at the time how slow this 105 and the MiGs were going. I really didn't. I know one thing, they didn't have their burner on, which the MiGs did not, and neither did he. which sort of surprised me because you would think the MiGs would have to have the burner on to keep up with the 105, period. But, you know, there was a lot going on, and that just hadn't quite sunk into my computer yet. And but they did not have the burner going, so I'm smoking now, and so I'm coming up low, and I'm starting to make my pull toward number 2 MiG. All of a sudden, now my eyeballs start getting a sense of speed differential here, and I realize that I am absolutely it's smoking like hell, and I'm gonna overshoot, and that's the last thing you want to ever do is overshoot and have an enemy airplane positioned behind you. So what I did is I pulled hard. In fact, my G meter when I got home was 7.5 to 8 Gs. I did it smooth though, so that made it okay. And I pull and I open up with my cannon. Now the 105 had one of the finest air-to-air weapons in the world, which was a 20 millimeter cannon. It's a Vulcan cannon. It had 6 barrels. It fired 6,000 rounds a minute of 20 millimeter, and we had high explosive shells on board. And so I start my pull, and I just, well, I'm opening up on, and I was actually on his left side, and I thought I saw a flash on his left wing that where I hit him. But like I said, I was just smoking, and so I didn't get a chance to really dwell on it very long. And so I'm going up now, I'm almost vertical. There was a broken layer of clouds, and with the clouds, it was sort of like, well, just assume where his knees are, there's a cloud layer. And they were broken, and when I went up, I just went up screaming, I popped my boards, I go up over the overcast, and I'm sitting up there, upside down, inverted, saying, you stupid lieutenant, you had one shot at a MiG and you blew it. At about that time, remember the cloud layer's right about here. Out from underneath this cloud layer is a MiG-17 with his afterburner going. I'm sorry about that, guys. And I said, oh my God. And so I'm sitting up there inverted. The MiG's right here. I pull my nose down. I just ease forward a little bit on him, open up, and the first shells went right through the cockpit. Now that might sound like something that's okay, but there still was respect for the pilots in these other airplanes. I think you've seen plenty of World War II, cases of this. But anyway, the first bullets went right through the cockpit and worked their way down the left side of the airplane. And while I'm actually shooting at this guy, if you ever see my film, you'll see this. 105. Totally, he never saw this because we talked about it when I got back, to Karat. He never saw us, but he went right between us. A big ball of fire comes out behind the 105. And I never saw, I didn't really realize what was going on until later. But apparently I had a drop round because he was below my firing line. And apparently I had a drop round that caught his fuel tank. And at that, with all the MiGs, everybody punched their tanks off, so nobody brought home a compromised tank with a hole in it. When they got back to Kokoda or Karat, everybody had clean airplanes, so we never found out who that was.
During the question and answer period, Dave Waldrop described the techniques they used to neutralize the SAM threat.
Well, yeah, what you're talking about, some of our SAM evasive tactics, yeah, obviously we didn't just sit there. If a SAM's coming your direction, you don't just sit there and wait to see if it hits you. And I don't mean that to be smart or nothing. But you'd have to see it. You'd have to see it and project its trajectory. And what you would generally try to do from where we were located, our best defense was to break hard into the missile and down, because it's got a certain amount of acceleration momentum. And like I said, that thing cranks up to about Mach 2 by the time it's getting to the target area. And so our best tactic, if we saw it, was to break into it as fast as we could go before it had a chance to change direction and home in on it.
Richard Nixon said, quote, "No event in American history is more misunderstood than the Vietnam War. It was misreported then, and it's misremembered now, end quote. Perhaps the best antidote for misunderstanding and misreporting is to simply listen to Dick Diller, Dave Waldrop, and the hundreds of thousands of others who served in Southeast Asia. On this day, their collective experiences, told in their own words, certainly had the Warbirds in Review audience thinking and remembering.